You don't even know who I am, Dad. You don't know what I feel, what I think, and even if I tried to explain, would you really understand? There are 15 legendary black icons of the silver screen, beloved by millions, admired around the globe. But behind the red carpets and flashing lights was a heartbreak so deep, it swallowed them whole. After losing their life partners, their lives unraveled in ways the world never saw. Only now are the devastating truths finally coming to light. Stories of shattered marriages, words of apology left unsaid, and betrayals that cut so deep, healing was never an option. Not even fame, fortune, or critical acclaim could mend the wounds left by love lost. In the end, many of them passed away in silence, lonely, burdened by secrets they never dared to share. In today's video, we uncover their haunting final chapters, the hidden pain behind the spotlight. Ruby Dee, a lifetime marked by love and loss. Ruby Dee was more than just a Hollywood legend. She was a force of grace, intellect, and fierce passion. Known for her powerful, socially conscious roles and her undeniable stage presence, Ruby captivated hearts around the world. But behind the accolades and applause was a woman whose life was shaped by deep, enduring heartache. In 1948, she married Ossie Davis, not just the love of her life but her partner in art, activism, and everything in between. Together, they were a powerhouse, over 5 decades of shared purpose, creativity, and resilience. They weathered racism, the hardships of show business, and the shifting tides of American history, hand in hand. But nothing could prepare Ruby for what happened in the spring of 2005. That day, as she made Ossie a cup of tea, death quietly crept in. He collapsed from a heart attack before she even realized something was wrong. By the time she reached him, it was too late. At the hospital, her cries pierced the silence. The pain was so raw, so consuming, it stripped her of words. In an instant, her world shattered. Without Ossie, Ruby wasn't just grieving, she was incomplete. The laughter, the conversations, the shared glances, they were gone. And no one could fill that void. In the years that followed, Ruby Dee lived in quiet mourning. She never remarried. She couldn't. Her heart was still with Ossie. The grief seeped into her bones, slowly dimming the vibrant woman the world once knew. Some days she didn't eat. She'd just sit in silence in the very room where he took his last breath. On June 11, 2014, Ruby Dee passed away after a long battle with cancer. Though she left behind a legacy of brilliance and courage, she also carried with her a wound that never healed, the loss of her soulmate. Until her final breath, she was haunted by the memory of the man she loved. Their story wasn't just about fame, it was about a love so deep, its absence could never be mended. Sidney Poitier made history in 1963, becoming the first black man to win the Academy Award for Best Actor. He shattered barriers and lit a path for generations of black artists in Hollywood. But while the world saw a trailblazer, few saw the quiet, aching loneliness behind the spotlight. In 1976, Sidney married Joanna Shimkus, a union filled with promise. But that promise began to wither under the weight of fame. Endless film roles, long absences, and the relentless pull of his career slowly eroded the foundation of their marriage. Joanna, devoted and loving, began to notice the signs. Lipstick on his collar, unfamiliar perfume, and too many nights when he never came home. One cold evening in 1981, Joanna finally broke her silence. She confronted Sidney, desperate for the truth. And in that moment, tense, raw, and painful, he confessed. He had been unfaithful. In admitting his betrayal, Sidney lost not just the love of his wife, but a piece of his own soul. Decades passed. Then in 2017, Sidney received crushing news. Joanna, the woman he once vowed to love forever, had died after a long and painful battle with cancer. Though they had long since divorced, her death hit him like a storm. It wasn't just the passing of a former partner. It was the final closing of a door he had always hoped to someday reopen. The chance for forgiveness, for reconciliation, for healing, it was gone. Memories flooded back. The lakeside home they had dreamed of growing old in, the trips they never took, the quiet mornings that never came to be. And with those memories came a haunting truth. some mistakes leave scars that time can never heal. On January 7, 2022, Sidney Poitier passed away in solemn solitude. In those final moments, surrounded by the cold hum of hospital machines, he didn't just feel the fading of life, he felt the weight of regret. He thought of Joanna, of the life they might have had, of the man he once promised he would be. But it was too late. As his eyes closed for the last time, maybe he dreamed of that peaceful lakeside home. Maybe he saw Joanna, smiling in the distance. Or maybe all he felt was the emptiness of the love he lost, the promises he broke, and a heart too burdened to ever be whole again. Carmen McRae, one of jazz's most unforgettable voices, lived a life wrapped in melodies, fame, and heartbreak. Her story wasn't just about the music, it was about a love so intense it burned itself out. It all began in 1946, inside a smoky Chicago nightclub. The air was thick with saxophones and cigarette haze when Carmen first locked eyes with Gerald Wilson, a striking trumpeter whose gaze was as cold as his playing was fire. That night, something electric sparked between them. By 1947, they were married. To the world, they were the perfect jazz duo. He composed, she sang. On stage, they were magic. But behind the curtain? Chaos. Two fiery talents clashing night after night. Arguments erupted not about betrayal or money, but music, about harmony, tempo, phrasing. Love slowly blurred into pride. Passion twisted into power struggles. Then came one stormy night in 1980. A small disagreement, barely worth remembering, triggered something deep. Gerald walked out of the studio without a word. He drove home in the rain and collapsed. A heart attack, triggered by years of emotional exhaustion. The next morning, Carmen received the call. Gerald had suffered a stroke, and he would never wake up again. That day, Carmen sat frozen in the studio, the mic still hot. No one saw her cry, but something in her voice shifted forever. It grew deeper, weathered, like she was singing through invisible tears. After that, Carmen retreated from the spotlight. She never remarried. She avoided crowds. The only place she still seemed alive was the stage, where she swore she could still feel Gerald's presence, just beyond the spotlight. In her final years, Carmen lived quietly in a small Beverly Hills apartment. She stopped doing interviews, no longer performed. But every morning she made 2 cups of coffee, one for herself, one for Gerald, and set them both on the table. Then she'd sit in silence, staring out the window, where the morning light blurred the sorrow in her eyes. On November 10, 1994, Carmen McRae passed away after a battle with cancer. But those who knew her say she left this world with a faint smile. Maybe because beyond that final velvet curtain, the sound of a trumpet, familiar and sweet, was waiting to welcome her home. And this time, there would be no more arguments. Lena Horne was more than just a luminous jazz vocalist or a groundbreaking icon of 1940s Hollywood. She was a woman who carried elegance, strength, and soul in every note she sang. But for all the glitz and acclaim, Lena's heart beat for just one man, Lenny Hayden. A gifted conductor and her devoted husband, Lenny wasn't just the love of her life. He was the melody behind her music, the calm in her chaos. Their love defied the odds, blooming in the shadow of prejudice and fame. Together, they weathered storms that would have torn most couples apart, crafting a quiet but powerful love story amidst the noise of Hollywood. But life, with its cruel timing, has a way of stealing the things we hold most dear. In 1971, in a sunlit room in Palm Springs, Lena sat by the window, no longer the dazzling star who lit up jazz clubs and movie screens. She was simply a grieving woman, staring into a silence too heavy to bear. Lenny had died suddenly that April afternoon, collapsing in his study, still holding a note about the trip they had promised each other for years. Venice. He always wanted to take her there. To sit in a gondola, hand in hand, and watch the sun dip behind the water in quiet peace. But they never made it. They thought they had time. Lena ran to him that day, calling his name, her voice trembling with panic. But the only answer was stillness. The doctor said it was a stroke. Instant. No goodbye. No final whisper. Just gone. In the days that followed, The vibrant woman the world once knew faded behind drawn curtains and tear-stained pillows. Friends tried to lift her from her sorrow, but every morning she opened her eyes hoping it was all just a bad dream. It never was. That empty side of the bed reminded her Lenny wasn't coming back. What haunted Lena the most wasn't just his absence. It was the unfinished promise. That trip, that sunset, that dream they kept putting off for someday. She never thought someday would vanish so quickly. In the months that followed, Lena Horne became a shadow of herself. Her music, once rich with fire and feeling, grew quiet. Not because she had lost her gift, but because she had lost her reason, her soul. By 2010, after years of illness and solitude, Lena took her final breath in a quiet room. To the world, she passed from age and sickness. But those who truly knew her knew the truth. Lena Horne had begun to die the moment Lenny Hayden left her side. Sammy Davis Jr. wasn't just a star, he was a force. A trailblazing entertainer who shattered racial barriers and defied the odds to become one of the brightest icons of the 20th century. But behind the glitz, behind the gold records and sold-out shows, lived a man carrying wounds the spotlight couldn't heal. In 1970, Sammy married Alto Vice Gore, a stunning dancer he met while touring in London. Their love story burned bright, passionate, thrilling, and at times chaotic. Sammy had already endured public backlash for his interracial marriage to actress Mae Britt in the 1960s. With Alto Vice, things felt different. She wasn't just a partner, she was someone who understood the isolation that comes with fame. A co-star in the grand performance of his life. But when the curtains closed and the lights dimmed, reality hit hard. Their life together unfolded in a whirlwind of opulence, late-night parties, and reckless spending. Their Beverly Hills mansion, once filled with laughter and music, became a battleground of arguments and quiet heartbreak. Though they shared the same home, there were nights they felt like strangers, lost in the shadows of their own success. Then came the unthinkable. In 1989, Alto Vice, his anchor, his confidant, passed away suddenly. The woman who had stood by him through fame's storms was gone. Her death pierced Sammy's soul. He wandered through their home, now echoing with silence, haunted by memories of what once was. The music they used to dance to became nothing more than distant whispers in empty rooms. Not long after, Sammy's health began to decline. Throat cancer, which he had long ignored, came raging back. Doctors urged surgery. Removing his larynx might save his life. But for Sammy, losing his voice meant losing his identity. He refused. On May 16, 1990, Sammy Davis Jr. took his final breath in that same Beverly Hills home. The mansion that once echoed with his laughter now stood still, quiet, cold, and mourning its brightest light. Sammy Davis Jr. left behind a legendary legacy, but also a poignant truth. Even the greatest stars can feel utterly alone. He had it all: fame, fortune, a place in history. But in the end, what he craved most was simple: a hand to hold when the spotlight faded. Cicely Tyson, born in 1933, wasn't just a legendary actress. She was a force, a trailblazer who reshaped the image of black women in American cinema. But behind the awards, the acclaim, and the spotlight lived a love story that never quite healed. At the center of her heart was one man, Miles Davis. A musical genius, a tormented soul. Her husband, her once-in-a-lifetime love. Their story began in the turbulent 1960s, a romance electric and raw. They finally married in 1981, after years of passion and persistence. Together, they battled racism, fame, and the chaos that surrounded Miles's rise. But not even love could withstand the grip of addiction. As Miles spiraled deeper into darkness, Cicely stood by him until she no longer could. 7 years later, their marriage ended in a painful silence called divorce. But Cicely never let go. Her love for him, though bruised, never died. When Miles Davis passed away on September 28, 1991, Cicely was devastated. She hadn't been by his side in his final moments, and the weight of that regret followed her like a shadow. His music, his spirit, it clung to her, refusing to let go. And she didn't want it to. Then, one autumn afternoon in 2010, something extraordinary happened. At 76, while walking through Harlem, she heard a trumpet, a familiar, aching melody. It was Miles. Not in the flesh, but in the sound. From that day forward, she returned to that same Harlem street, listening to a street musician play Miles's songs. It became her quiet ritual, her way of holding on. But on one rainy night at the end of 2011, everything changed. As the storm rolled in, and the trumpet wailed out the high, haunting notes of "So What," Cicely collapsed in the downpour. In her final breath, she whispered, "Miles, I understand now." And then she was gone. But Cicely Tyson didn't simply pass away that night. She ascended. Her death wasn't an ending. It was a reunion, a poetic finale written in raindrops and jazz notes. In Harlem, her legend lives on. In the melody of a trumpet, in the echo of a lost love, in the eternal dance between soul and sound. She was a legend. A voice that could shake the soul and soothe it all at once. Nina Simone, the woman behind timeless classics like Feeling Good, I Put a Spell on You, and Cinnamon. But behind the fierce brilliance and musical genius was a woman haunted by the ghosts of love and regret. In 1970, on a rainy New York night, Nina got a call that would shatter her. Her close friend delivered the news. Andy Stroud, her former husband, the man she had both loved deeply and resented bitterly, had died. No goodbye. No final words. Just gone. Though their marriage had ended, her heart wasn't prepared for the finality of his death. Memories surged, nights filled with fiery arguments, tender silences, and fleeting moments of peace. She had labeled him controlling, even cruel at times. But what she never knew, what no one told her until it was too late, was the truth. Andy had been silently fighting cancer. And their divorce? It wasn't out of anger. It was his way of protecting her, from the pain, from watching him fade. That revelation crushed her. It blurred the lines of love and hate, leaving her drowning in guilt. She'd never get the chance to say sorry or goodbye. Years passed. Nina lived on, wrapped in memories. But the music, the passion that once set her soul ablaze, now rang hollow. In late 2002, in the quiet shadows of Paris, Nina was diagnosed with cancer. Alone in a stark white hospital room, she often dreamed of Andy. He would appear in the fog of her fading mind, distant but smiling as if to say, "It's okay. I forgive you." On April 21, 2003, Nina Simone passed away quietly. And with her, closed a chapter steeped in pain, love, and the tragedy of truths learned too late. She never fully understood the depth of Andy's love, or the silent sacrifices he made. But somewhere beyond this world, perhaps, they finally found peace. Red Fox, born in 1922, a trailblazing comedian whose razor-sharp wit and unapologetic satire brought roaring laughter to millions, lived a life that hid a far more painful truth. In 1977, he married Evelyn Killebrew, a woman he loved deeply. But love alone wasn't enough. Behind the curtains of his fame, their marriage was marred by endless arguments, emotional distance, and the crushing weight of his relentless career. Their bond, once unshakable, began to crack. Misunderstandings piled up, and by the late 80s, they quietly went their separate ways. But Red never stopped loving her. Evelyn had stood by him during the hardest years. Her presence, her laughter, her warmth lingered in his memory like a ghost he could never let go. Then came 1991. Evelyn died suddenly from heart disease. The news hit Red like a freight train. Just when it seemed the scars had begun to fade, they ripped open again, deeper than ever before. That October, silence filled the rooms they once shared. Her laughter was gone. Her presence, just a memory echoing in empty halls. And then, not long after, Red passed away too, in that very same house, on a lonely October night. No one by his side. No final laughter. Just a devastating silence. The world lost a legend who made it laugh. But behind that laughter was a man crushed by heartbreak, solitude, and the echoes of a love he never truly lost. Eartha Kitt, an icon of beauty, brilliance, and charisma, lived a life that shimmered on the surface but was shadowed by deep, enduring sorrow. Her marriage to John William MacDonald in the early 1960s began with promise but quickly fell apart. By 1965, the divorce was final, but for Eartha, the emotional wounds never healed. She carried the weight of regret like a scar on her soul, a quiet grief that followed her through every curtain call and spotlight. Though she moved on with her life and career, a silent ache always lingered. When John passed away in 1988 after a long illness, the news hit her like a lightning bolt on a cold winter night. Her breath caught in her chest as if time had frozen. But it wasn't just his death that pierced her, it was the memory of the final words she'd thrown at him in anger. In a moment of bitterness, she had called him a bastard, told him he'd never be anything. And now those words echoed endlessly, unforgiving and cruel. She couldn't forget. She couldn't take them back. And with him gone, there would never be a chance to say she was sorry. After John's death, Eartha was haunted by dreams, visions of him, silent and still, staring at her not with rage, but with an aching quiet that chilled her to the core. The silence spoke louder than any accusation. It was as if he stood there asking, "Why?" Her heart grew heavy, burdened by a pain she had carved into her own spirit. When Eartha Kitt passed away on Christmas Eve in 2008, it marked more than the end of a legendary life. It was the final chapter in a story of unresolved grief, a sorrow she carried to the grave. No apology ever spoken. No peace ever found. Just a love lost and a wound that time refused to heal. Ethel Waters, the legendary voice of jazz and blues, was a woman who conquered the stage, but quietly battled loneliness behind the curtain. In the early 1930s, she married Albert McNeil, a man whose love once lit up her world. But as her star began to rise, their paths grew apart. Ethel was relentless, chasing greatness with every note she sang, while Albert was a simple man, content with far less. By 1934, the divide had grown too wide. She walked away, calling him a man without ambition, unable to keep pace with the life she was destined for. But success couldn't silence the ache. The divorce wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the beginning of a wound that never healed. Though her career soared, guilt became her shadow. Albert wasn't cruel. He wasn't careless. And as the years passed, she questioned whether she had been too quick to let go. Alone at her piano, she poured her sorrow into every keystroke, the melodies echoing with regret. Albert passed in the late 1960s, and with his death came a sorrow too heavy to bear. One crisp autumn afternoon in 1977, Ethel stood quietly by his grave, a single flower trembling in her hand. She whispered an apology into the wind, words soaked in heartbreak, words he'd never hear. That moment was her farewell. Not just to him, but to a lifetime of what-ifs and could-have-beens. When Ethel died later that year, she took with her a voice that moved millions, and a story that reminds us how often we recognize the true value of love only when it's too late. Diane Carroll, the trailblazing actress who made history as the first black woman to win a Golden Globe for a lead role in a television series, lived a life that sparkled on the outside, but was haunted by heartbreak behind the scenes. Her love story with Robert DeLeon, a promising music producer and her second husband, was brief yet unforgettable. In the scorching heat of a July afternoon in 1977, as Diane was preparing for a business trip, laughter still fresh on her lips, her world was suddenly shattered. The call came. Robert had been killed in a horrific car accident. Just like that, everything changed. The man who had captured her heart was gone forever, and nothing could prepare her for the weight of that loss. Robert's death left a wound so deep it never fully healed. Though she tried to move on, the pain never loosened its grip. Night after night, dreams of Robert haunted her, his face appearing in the darkness, filled with sorrow, reminding her of the things left unsaid, the moments they'd never get back. For decades, she carried that grief quietly, wrapped in elegance and grace. But behind the poised smile was a heart still aching. In the late 2010s, as she battled cancer, her strength began to fade. On October 4, 2019, Diane Carroll passed away, still in the shadow of the love she lost. Her story ended not just with a farewell, but with the echo of a love that was never finished, and a lifetime marked by beauty, brilliance, and bittersweet longing. Esther Rall, the unforgettable star of Good Times, lit up television screens with her powerful presence. But behind the scenes, her heart carried a quiet ache that never truly faded. After divorcing her husband, Esteban Rall, in 1950, Esther's life was marked not just by success, but by solitude. Their love unraveled not from betrayal, but from dreams that diverged too far to reconcile. Esther was a woman of ambition, chasing greatness on the stage and screen. Esteban, on the other hand, longed for a life of peace and simplicity. Torn between love and purpose, Esther made the painful choice to walk away. Her career soared, but she never remarried. And with each passing year, the loneliness only deepened. Then, on a quiet spring morning in 1988, as sunlight spilled through her window, the news came. Esteban had died after a long illness. Grief struck like a wave. Memories came rushing back. Laughter, arguments, moments of tenderness, and with them, a storm of unspoken words. The apology she had rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times would never be heard. When Esther passed away in November 1998, she left behind more than a legacy of brilliance. She left with a heart that had loved deeply, lost quietly, and carried the weight of things she never got to say. A lifetime of applause, but in the silence of her soul, regret, and a love that time never fully erased. Billie Holiday, one of the most soul-stirring voices of the 20th century, lived a life painted with fame, but shaded in sorrow. As her star soared throughout the 1940s and early 50s, behind the curtain of her success was a heart weighed down by loneliness. Though she never officially married during the peak of her career, she shared a deep, passionate bond with a man who felt like a husband in every way that mattered. But that love was fragile. Caught in the clutches of addiction, the man she loved slowly slipped away, not just from her, but from life itself. Billie tried to save him, to be his anchor, but the pull of his demons was too strong. When he died, it wasn't just his life that ended, it shattered what remained of Billie's hope in love. His death left a hole in her heart, a silence in her soul that not even applause could fill. Devastated and disillusioned, she turned to drugs, seeking escape, seeking numbness. The lights may have glittered on stage, but her nights were cold and quiet, filled with shadows, regret, and a love that never came back. On July 17, 1959, Billie Holiday passed away at just 44 after a long and painful battle with illness and addiction. She didn't just leave behind a legacy of unforgettable music, she left behind a haunting story of a woman who gave her all to love, only to be left with nothing but broken dreams and beautiful songs. Her voice still lingers in the air, aching with sorrow, as if she's still here, singing the blues that life never let her escape. She was the voice of a generation, the golden girl of pop, blessed with an angelic tone that could move mountains. Whitney Houston wasn't just a superstar, she was a force of nature. But behind the spotlight, behind the fame and the flawless notes, lived a woman slowly unraveling. Her love story with Bobby Brown began like a fairy tale, but it quickly spiraled into something darker. When they married in 1992, Whitney was at the peak of her career. But addiction, volatile fights, and emotional chaos tore their union apart. By the time they divorced in 2007, the damage had been done, deep, lasting, and impossible to ignore. Though they parted ways, Bobby's shadow lingered in Whitney's life. They shared a daughter, Bobby Christina, and the ghosts of that failed marriage never stopped haunting her. When Bobby Brown died in 2022, something in Whitney broke. Even though they were long separated, the pain never truly left. Then came the night of February 11, 2012. Inside a Beverly Hills hotel room, Whitney Houston took her final breath. She was only 48. The world was stunned. The voice that once soared across stadiums was silenced forever. Her death wasn't just a tragic loss. It was the final chapter in a story marked by heartbreak, addiction, and a loneliness no amount of fame could fix. Whitney's fall reminds us that even legends can be broken, that even the brightest stars can fade when the pain of the past is never healed. James Earl Jones. His voice, deep and commanding, shaped the sound of cinema itself. From Darth Vader to Mufasa, he was the soul behind legends. But behind that iconic baritone was a man who lived through heartbreaks that no script could ever heal. In 1957, James fell in love with Julienne Marie, a gifted actress he met during a stage production. For over a decade, she stood by his side through his early struggles. But by 1968, the cracks had grown too wide. Their marriage ended, quietly and painfully. Though they parted, James never stopped honoring her memory. She had been his anchor when the spotlight barely flickered. Years later, fate brought him love again. In 1982, he met actress Cecilia Hart while performing in Othello. With Cecilia, James found not just love, but peace, a home, a family, a second chance at happiness. But that joy was not to last. On October 26, 2016, everything changed. The phone rang. Cecilia had lost her battle with ovarian cancer. James wasn't with her when she passed. At the time, he was in a recording studio, script in hand, but when the words came, he couldn't speak. He later confessed that he could still hear Cecilia's voice in his mind, gently asking, "Why weren't you there?" After her passing, James retreated from the world. He kept working, yes, but something had dimmed. His eyes no longer sparkled the way they once did. He visited Cecilia's grave often, always with red roses, her favorite, and whispered apologies that only the wind could carry. In September 2024, at the age of 93, James Earl Jones passed away quietly in his New York home. Rain tapped softly on the window as he sat in a chair, holding an old photograph of Cecilia. His eyes were closed, as though he'd finally found the peace he'd been chasing for years. On his desk, an unfinished recording played his last line, "I'll see you in the stars." And so ends the story of one of Hollywood's most powerful voices, silenced by time, but forever echoing in our hearts. For even legends are not spared the weight of love and loss. Which part of James's story moved you the most? Which legend's pain do you still carry with you? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold stories from behind the curtain.